Welcome back to another episode of Rethink Real Estate. And today, what I'm going to be quickly taking you through is the concept of the honeymoon period. Now, I know that sounds a little bit weird from the get-go, but I'll obviously explain more on the episode. However, I was listening to a podcast where it talked about the fallout rate out of escrow escalating to a very high extent in many of the major cities in the US. And it made me think about the traditional process, made me think about how quickly people are trying to do deals and how it's such a thing within the real estate industry to be able to sell something so quickly. But I believe that the honeymoon period is one of the big reasons why so many deals fall out of escrow. I talk a little bit more about the process of auction and how holding your buyers through to auction day allows our 99% close ratio that we do have without a great deal of fallout out of escrow because it goes through that process of elimination. Hope you enjoy. Hopefully it's helpful. Welcome to Rethink Real Estate. My name is Ben Brady, and this is a real estate podcast aimed to deliver sales strategies, marketing tips, and business insights from industry experts and myself to build a listing-focused business for the future. Let's get into it. Well, folks, today I wanted to have a conversation about the fallout rate out of escrow at the moment. As I was thinking through this and getting some of the information that I got from Michael Delpreet, who has a podcast called Context. There's an episode on there that I was listening to recently, going through some data from the company called Real Trends, where the fallout rate out of escrow in many of the major cities has doubled, in some cases tripled, over the last little while. And when I say little while, over the last 6 months, you've seen it escalate. They were going through a great deal of different data points and around the real estate market. And Mike Delpreet actually said to the gentleman, the CEO of Real Trends, it was like, is there any standout data point that, people should be conscious of? And he said it was the fallout rate out of escrow, because whilst there is incredibly less deals that are happening at the moment, going from the beginning of 2022 to now, it's gone from 6,500 transactions all the way down to 6.5 million transactions all the way down to 4 million transactions within just the US alone. Is that there's a great deal, it feels like the marketplace is moving because there's a great deal more transactions that are going into escrow. But therefore, in some cases, like I said, in excess of 50% and more than double and sometimes triple the fallout rate out of escrow in some of the major cities. And I thought to myself, why is that? And I think that it's because one is that we've been used to the real estate marketplace moving so quickly for so long, is that there's this rush to get a buyer into escrow. And it led me back to an auction concept of holding a buyer all the way through auction. And I want to talk a little bit about that, but I want to get through the major point from a traditional sense first of all, is that listening to that podcast, I was sort of like, it's interesting that you say that, because the transition from a buyer being interested to then an offer to then counter offers going out and then going into escrow and then the deal falling out, that individual distraction, that period of time itself is quite a long period of time, but it's really not when you look at how rapidly things are moving, because the agent is, hyperventilating or so conscious that they want to get things moving as quickly as possible. I see agents all the time promoting, I sold it in 2 days, I sold it in 4 days, I sold it in 5 days. And I've been through on previous episodes on this podcast that, I honestly believe that if you sell a property within 14 days and you don't take it through a transparent process, is that I do believe that you're underselling the property most of the time. But again, my own data points, my own beliefs, my own research has put me there. And you don't know what you don't know. So I can fully appreciate that if you're just a traditional agent and you haven't experienced the auction and you haven't dived into some of the other statistics and actually want to find the defaults in traditional real estate. And that's what I want to lead to, is that finding the defaults in traditional real estate is something that we do on a very consistent basis. And a lot of people don't want to hear it, and yet they still want to promote that they are the person that's doing right by the seller. And realistically, if we're rushing a deal into escrow, it's this thing called ensure that the honeymoon period is over. And it was a conference. I was at a conference recently called Built How. Ben Kinney was speaking on stage, and he said, "Make sure the honeymoon period's over." He was referring to a business deal that he was going through, And that business deal, he ensured that he just purposely took more time, made the other person on the other side become impatient so that therefore they could see their true characteristics when they were put under stress and in a little bit more of a strenuous situation. And it sort of made me think a little bit about the auction process. And obviously listening to that podcast made me think also about the traditional process of our rush to put things into escrow to say that we sold it quickly. When realistically, I think that is one of the real main reasons that we're falling out of escrow. Forget the damage that it does to a property, forget the time that you lose, forget all of those different things and the strain that it puts on your relationship with your client, is that going back to the factor of making sure that the honeymoon period is a little bit over. Has the buyer only seen it once? Do you know another statistic that the Real Trend person said is that there's 50% of deals that go into escrow with the buyer only having seen the property once and only spending maximum 10 minutes in that home? That blew my mind, considering that you're making a decision to live in that property. And then I thought back to a few situations of properties that we've bought and lived in, and you really get to know that property and maybe the defects of that property in that first night that you're there, or maybe the honeymoon period wears off after a week and then you start looking, oh, there's a mark on the wall, or this doesn't work, or what's happening here. And in essence is that I think that if we all took a breath and took a little bit more time, therefore we wouldn't have as much of our deals falling out of escrow at the moment, because a buyer is making a decision in a restricted inventory marketplace that they keep the peripheral vision open of other properties coming on the marketplace whilst they're in escrow, and keeping in mind that the average escrow contingency period, or for those terms to be satisfied, keeping in mind it's 2 weeks to 21 days. That means 2 weeks to 21 days where they've got the peripheral vision open, they're looking at other things, they're considering, did we get the best property possible, or did we just make a decision because we had to buy and we had to move forward? Because anybody in this marketplace, you're not buying because you love the interest rate that you're getting. You're buying probably because you have to, because you're moving here for a job, schools, kids. I think it was the divorce, divorce, death, all of those individual factors where a home is either on the marketplace or somebody is purchasing. But then it led me back to the theory of auction yet again. The perfection of auction of the traditional element of real estate is where I always lead back to. And one of the things that I do love about auction is ensures that by the end of the auction date, if you've done a really good job of holding your buyer to that auction date, okay, it really does take them through to make sure that they are through the honeymoon period of that, to make sure that they really want it. It wasn't just the hype in that moment. A lot of people ask me, well, what happens if they're the highest bidder and they got caught up in the moment, and do they always close? We have over a 99% success rate of somebody, if they're the highest bidder at auction, of actually closing on that property. And the reason why is, one, they fought for it, but two is because they probably saw it in week 1 or 2 and they've waited 2 or 3 weeks in order to get to the auction date itself. They've convinced themselves of this property. They really want this property. They've done the due diligence. They've probably been back a few times as well. They've looked at all the reports and disclosures that are there. They have done everything necessary before they've taken action. And people ask me all the time, well, Ben, how do you hold buyers all the way through to the auction date? It's very, very simple. It's an incredibly simple process. Communication. It's interesting that people say to me all the time is that, what is the one thing that you believe is the most important part of a real estate journey for a listing agent? Is communication with seller. But if you are a listing agent, it's communication with buyer and buyer's agent as well throughout that entire process. Usually a buyer and their agent, or just a buyer, walks into the open house, they see the property, and then you hope for a call from their agent or a call back to you if they've taken one of your business cards and come direct to tell you that they're interested. Take that a little bit further. Get their information at the front door. Make sure that you've made it a policy of that open house to get their information, not because you want to build your database. That's going to happen by default, but also because you want to be able to call and you want to be able to communicate. I mean countless, and I can't even put it into context to give you better understanding of how passionate I am about this point, is that I've had buyers that have come through on day one of an open house that I've done on a property, and then I've kept them up to speed the entire way through, and they've become a registered bidder. But in the first instance of that phone call, they weren't interested. So ring, ring, ring. Hi, it's Ben Brady from Harcourts Real Estate. I met you at 38 Smith Street on the weekend. Do you remember that property? Yes, I do. Excellent. Now, when can I get you back for a second look at that property? An immediate assumption that they're interested in the property. Oh, Ben, we're not interested. It's just not for us. We were just looking. Okay, great. Well, part of my responsibility is to get an understanding of your price feedback and your overall feedback of the property so that I can send it back to my sellers and give them an accurate assessment of what the market is. Do you mind if I ask you a few questions? Sure. Great. What did you like? What did you not like about the property? And then how much do you think the home's worth? Well, I think it's worth 550,000. Okay, how did you arrive at that price? Oh, well, just from other things that we've seen in the area. Great. Have you made any offers on other properties? Well, yeah, we have. Have you missed out on those properties? Just general questions. Great. So you're telling me that if you could if the seller would accept 550 for this property, you wouldn't be interested. Well, no, we wouldn't be interested. Okay, well, if the seller would accept 500, would that create interest for you? Oh, would they accept 500? Oh, I'm not sure. Would you put it on paper? Where I'm going with all of this, guys, all of these actual genuine curiosity points, this buyer could tell me, no, look, Ben, I'm not even interested at 500. No problem. Hey, look, things change. I'm going to keep you up to date with what's going on in the auction itself because we're leading into auction date. The auction's 3 weeks away. I'll keep you up to date with what's happening. Oh, you don't need to. We're not overly interested. No problem. Okay, thanks so much. Now, this is the part of the journey of the regular follow-up and holding on to people, is that person usually would never get another phone call again after they said they weren't interested. They might have not even get a phone call about something else that you might be able to help them with, adding to database, whatever it is, okay? Forget that element. Let's stay focused on the auction property itself and holding on to that person the whole way through. Call them week 2. Ring, ring, ring. Hi there. My name's Ben Brady. I'm from Harcourts Real Estate. I spoke to you about 38 Smith Street a while back. You said you weren't interested in the property, but I thought I'd just give you a call and let you know that based on the activity that we're getting, based on our seller's expectation, this quite possibly could be one of the best buys in Laguna Niguel this year. And I thought I would just let you know, just in case your opinion of the property's changed. Can I get you back so that you can see whether or not it's good? Well, what do you mean? Could I get a deal? Possibly. I'm not sure. But either way, is it all I know? Is that if I called you and told you that it sold for, I don't know, $450,000 on auction day, would you be disappointed that you missed out on this property? Yes, I would be. Great. Come back for a second look. Let's have a look at it. Let's see if this is something that you would consider. Now, you might be thinking to yourself there at the moment, well, why would I get them back at a lower price point? This is what most agents are missing, folks. This is what most agents are missing. One of the biggest things that the auction team does is babysit realtors about low offers. Oh, we got a low offer. Oh my God. Who gives a shit? Doesn't matter. You're not obligated to accept it. It helps educate. You can leverage that offer against other people in order to gain leverage in the negotiation for your client, the seller. Guys, we've got to start removing the vocabulary of low offer. Remove it from your vocabulary. You've just got to consider that it's an offer. That person genuinely put it forth because they think that the home could be worth that or hope that the home's worth that. Okay? Use it for the leverage that it ultimately gives you to educate your client, to curve their expectations. They're not obligated to accept it. Okay? They're not obligated to accept it. So therefore, where I'm going through with this is holding that person all the way through, further qualifying them to the furthest extent to see whether or not they're somebody that you can pull into the competition. This is the major difference when it comes to auction versus traditional. Traditional, you are trying to marry somebody to the house as quickly as possible. What happens with most marriages that people get together really, really quickly? They're probably divorced 50% of the time within 5 years later. Hasn't been stress tested, hasn't been put through the process. Same thing with the buyers being introduced to a property. They see it quickly, they fall out quickly because they've fallen in love, they've gone through the honeymoon period, it's all amazing, and then they panic or whatever they do. Okay? With auction, we're convincing people to come back into the equation. It doesn't mean that they're the wrong buyer. It means they could be the right buyer, I should say. It means they could be competition to the right buyer. But either way, we're gathering interest. That is the primary difference. And we're giving it time. They see the property at week 1 or week 2. There's still a week or 2 left until the auction date. They come back. They look at it. They've looked at all the due diligence. They've gone through it. The honeymoon period is over and you're left standing with the people that really want the property. And somebody might put an offer in to stop the auction prior to. You need to make sure that they're committed. So this is the next part of this, is that even if we accept an offer prior to auction, it's a better buyer most of the time because, one, we've stress tested them. They go, are you sure about this? Because if we're going to stop the auction, we need your terms to be unbelievable. Remove the contingencies. We're not going to accept anything if it's going to, hurt our process. Also, have you looked at all the due diligence that we've done up front, the home inspection, everything? You need to sign off that you're comfortable with that prior to us accepting your offer. It's a very different state, guys. That is why our fallout rate after a property is going to escrow with an auction is less than 5% at the moment. Okay, 5%. Right? So realistically, we need to look at this from a perspective of that, are we getting into bed with our buyers into the escrow process too quickly? I believe that answer is yes, based on the pure principle that we are all just trying to do things as quickly as possible and get our money as quickly as possible. You may be on the other side of this podcast screaming at me, no, I do it for the clients, I do it for this. Well, start running process correctly. Make sure that honeymoon period is over. Take longer. Allow it to mature in the sense before you get it to its absolute pinnacle point. Now, I know that this is contradicting in the back of my mind here that time kills ordeals. Correct. But at the moment, when you're dealing with low inventory marketplaces with buyers that are only really buying right now because they probably have to, you need to take alternative measures. And this is where, yet again, regardless of the market, the auction process comes out on top because it forces you to do this by default. Thanks so much for listening, guys. Hopefully this has helped. Hopefully it's made some sense. So about 75% of our audience hasn't liked, followed, or subscribed to our podcast. It would mean the world to us, and it would help this podcast more than you know to expand our reach if you were to like, follow, or subscribe on any of the platforms that you're watching or listening on. Thanks again.